If you love ancient history, then this is the channel for you. History Hit TV. It's like Netflix, but dedicated just to ad-free history documentaries, including a huge library of ancient history content from the 9th Legion to Boudica to the First Britain. Simply check out the details in the description below and make sure you use code Odyssey on sign up.
Look at that. One of the finest manor houses in Britain. It was built for a powerful family, played host to Charles I. You can imagine how excited the archaeologists were when they discovered the moat of this Grade 1 listed building. Except there was one tiny problem. Look at this map the archaeologists drew. There's the house, here's the moat, and does it go up to here and then turn around the house? No, it goes hurtling off in that direction. This is the direction the moat's going in, but what on earth's going on? What's it protecting? Well, there have been several theories, from a Roman fort to a royal court, from a chapel to a heavily fortified cattle enclosure. And we've got just 3 days to rip up this field and find out what this has got to do with that. Please don't let it be a cattle enclosure, please. Not a cattle enclosure. Llancaich is just north of Cardiff, sitting on a plateau of land in the middle of the rolling South Wales valleys. The earthworks we're here to investigate were first recorded in the 1970s, but so far all attempts to establish exactly what they are have failed.
Where he's coming in now is where that ditch was shown coming through there.
But it makes sense to assume they've got something to do with next-door Llancaich Fawr Manor, where the powerful Pritchard family once entertained Charles I. And the manor itself, now a museum and education centre, is also a bit of a mystery, because no one knows if it was the first house to be built on this site. You've got this whole place to run, and you've got coach loads of kids coming in, and all the tourists, and you've invited us here for 3 days.
We have indeed. I just really want to know whether we've got anything else that's earlier than about 1530, which is what the date we think the house behind us is, because I don't think the manor house is the only thing that's important on this site. It's always struck me as rather strange that we have this potential moated enclosure and it actually goes out in the opposite direction from the house.
And in this document from the Royal Commission, it says this might be a medieval moated site, or, on balance, more likely a Roman origin. And then the golden words, excavation will be required to decide the matter. So you're quite happy to fend the kids and the children off and let us get on with it?
Absolutely. No, I'd be delighted.
So, do we have an earlier moated house, or even a Roman fort in this enormous field? It's a big question, and for once we're not waiting for Geophysics to answer it.
There are definite earthworks there, definite earthworks.
Because some of the team have decided to break with tradition and open a trench immediately. Look at that, not only a trench, but a big one. Here are the 3 wise monkeys of archaeology. Ben, how come we got a trench in already?
Well, Stuart had a wander about this morning and he picked up these very low earthworks, but they seem to line up with a possible moat. So we thought we'd go for it. We couldn't wait any longer.
A couple of years ago, they put a trench across where they think the earthworks were, and they found 2 rows of stones, 2 sort of banks of stones with a post hole in the middle. Until we open up a bigger area, we won't know whether we can identify these stone rows, whether we can find any more post holes. We've got to think big.
Surely this is going to be the easiest dig we've ever done. There's the house, there's the moat, something in the middle, bosh, go home.
Yeah, except the term moat on an ordnance survey map covers a multitude of sins.
What does he mean?
Well, all it means really is that somebody's seen a bit of a depression. I mean, first of all, what is a moat? It could mean a water-filled ditch, it could just mean a dry ditch, it could be something that's functional, defensive, it could be for fish, it could just be something that looks nice in your grounds. I mean, we've got no idea what this thing is until we dig it.
So our first trench has gone in over the tantalisingly visible bit of the L-shaped earthworks that everyone is calling a moat.
In this first trench, it's always so important. I reckon you learn more from that first trench than you do all the other ones you put through. It gives you that first impression of the site.
We suspect this earthwork may only be one corner of a much larger feature with some potentially stunning archaeology in the middle. And until John and his team finish their survey of this field, we can only guess what that might be. Stuart, do me a favour, tell me our moat isn't a cattle enclosure.
Well, the problem with any ditch that turns a corner, the bank with it, historically people think of moats, and moats they associate with medieval manors and so on, but that could be the corner of any type of enclosure. It could be a corner of a Roman fort or fortlet, could be something like a medieval moat, it could be a cattle enclosure. But we've got to remember that just beyond that set of trees up there, there's a fine manor house. And so we've got to take those trees away and perhaps see in this field that we're part of the landscape that goes with that manor house over there.
So to work out what's going on in the field, we need to find out as much as we can about the house. And the most obvious thing about Llancaerfawr Manor is that it's a house of wealth and power. Which is probably not that surprising, considering it belonged to a powerful Welsh dynasty called the Pritchards.
As far as the history of South Wales goes, Pritchard was quite an important character during the Civil War period. He was governor of Cardiff Castle and then of Cardiff itself as well. And he comes from quite an important family. They're thought to be part of the royal line from Glamorgan, and that's the genealogy that they want to hold to, going back to Ifor Mawr, who was sort of a king of Glamorgan, some centuries beforehand.
I know it's early days yet, but what do you think might be the relationship between this house and that field?
If we've got what looks to be a moated enclosure that's heading out across the field, it's always made me wonder whether there's the possibility that there's an earlier building that's there. We just need to try and see if we can find it.
So could our potential moat enclose the ancestral home of the Pritchard family? Well, archaeological digs have shown time and time again that posh houses are built on top of or next to slightly less posh houses belonging to an earlier generation of the family. And it seems unlikely that a house as grand as the current Llancaerfawr was the first to be built on this site.
It's as though you might have had a big post in there.
Yeah.
And Ben and Phil have now hit the first evidence of the mysterious earthworks that promise so much.
That bank out there is one row of stones. This could be the post hole in the middle.
Yeah.
And then we go that way and we have another row of stones, which is the other bank. Who knows, geophysics might be able to track it all the way across.
Picking up the rest of this earthwork feature and what's inside it in this lovely flat field should be a walk in the park for geophys. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? It's lunchtime day one. We've put in our first trench. It was over where this moat-like feature is supposed to be, and sure enough, it's there. But the problem with this moat on the maps is that it looks vaguely L-shaped, nothing more. But now John has done the geophys. Is everything clear?
As clear as mud.
What do you mean?
Well, I've got an old stream bed for you. Ridge and furrow ploughing, a few lines, nothing that looks like a moat ditch, and I can't see any evidence for an enclosure.
In other words, the field could be completely empty, which is not good news with 2.5 days still to go. Afternoon, day one here at Llancaerfawr in South Wales, where we're looking for a moat, which rather than going round the medieval house over there, seems to be going off in this direction, which is a bit of a puzzle. But in order to solve it, John's been out with his geophys team, and Frankly, Ben, I think we now know even less about this site than we did when we got here. Look at that. Looks like someone sneezed on it in black and white.
Yeah, that's not quite the idea of geophysics, is it?
Basically, this geophysical phlegm has found no hint of the moat or any suggestion for the earlier medieval house we'd hoped to find in this field. And as for the moat, well, Ben and Phil have now worked out what the surveyors actually saw.
And if we look here, this mound of stones, boulders and pebbles here, that's more or less conforming with where the moat should be. But I have to say, there's nothing in this trench that looks terribly moat-like, and it ought to be here. There's no moat.
Oh dear, so the moat, the reason we came here, doesn't exist. But all due credit to John, the geophys has thrown up something unexpected that has got Ben and the team intrigued.
There's some sort of linear feature, a ditch or something like that, running up here, turning a corner and coming down here. This is enclosing a very large area. And that ties in quite nicely with something that Phil's got at the end of the trench here. We think we've got a feature running in that direction. But until we get a section across that ditch, we can't tell what date it is. It might be nothing at all to do with the medieval period. It could be something much earlier. We've got to dig it, basically, and have a look.
And what's intriguing about this newly discovered enclosure is that it and what's inside it appear to be under, in other words earlier, than the medieval ridge and furrow ploughing.
Oh well, let's have a go. Carry on and we'll see what we get.
So as well as investigating it in Trench 1, we're opening a second trench further along its northern boundary.
I think we've got an edge about there, look.
Right.
This is actually quite compacted. I think that's our edge.
We've been working on the theory that our main field may have been the site of a posh house that's earlier than the next door Grand Manor House.
Austere looking, isn't it?
It is rather grim and grand, isn't it?
But to work out if that's the case, we need to get as many dates from this site as possible, including the correct date for when the manor house was built.
So, right, it's just cutting through this original being here with the partition. And it looks like this whole corridor has been added early 17th century.
If we look at this collar, it's not in great condition, is it?
What about the purlings? They look like original. They've got peg holes for the common rafters.
So we've brought in a dendrochronologist, because oddly enough, the best dating evidence for a house is often found in the roof timbers.
It's either significantly later than we'd anticipated or significantly earlier. We'll pick that up through the dendro, even if we don't get that fine resolution of dating.
Yeah.
And that would potentially allow us to fit it into the family history.
So hopefully we'll get results back to you come day 3.
Brilliant.
The dendro dates and digging are going to have to be our main sources for the early story of Llancaich, because there's almost no written history for the Pritchard family prior to the 16th century. That was all passed down through word of mouth, although we do at least have an impressive family tree.
Well, they claimed that they went back a very long way indeed. And from up here, you will see how they trace their descent back to a very distinguished hero in this area in the 12th century, a man called Ivor ap Meirig, better known as Ivor Bach, Ivor the Small.
We know the Pritchard family lived somewhere in this area from at least the 1200s. But the first recorded mentions of a house at Llancaich don't appear until the mid-1500s.
Gwelwn niwl heb galon iach, a glaw yn gaiad Llancaich. We saw mist with no healthy heart and rain as a shroud over Llancaich.
So do we know where they're living before our house is built?
Unfortunately, we don't, and it'll be very exciting indeed if the archaeology can show that there was a major manorial centre of the Middle Ages here prior to the house that we know of.
Unfortunately, we don't seem to have any evidence for a medieval manor in the big field. But we're not giving up.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Because Stuart has a theory.
If you come a bit further, there's the other side of it against that tree there, look.
Oh, you'd easily get a cart over this, wouldn't you?
This is a seriously big bridge.
He thinks the landscape may hold a clue to the location of an earlier house on the other side of this vast site. Guys, you could have chosen a slightly nicer place.
Well, what we're starting to do now is kind of understand the site as a whole. I mean, we started out in the field on the other side over there. We're now thinking 180 degrees different. The house is over there. We're completely on the other side. And looking through the maps through time, what we see is that the main road that probably is this house is associated with, actually, we're standing on it now.
The house is facing south,
Yeah.
so there's got to be something in this corner rather than that corner as an entranceway. That's my feeling anyway.
So do you think this is the first house on this side?
I don't think there's anything in the house that to me says there's anything on that specific site before.
So does that mean there's unlikely to be another structure here?
No, there could be one in the vicinity of it.
Maps.
Why did you go, maps?
Well, here we have the tithe map for the area. You can see there's the house complex there. There is a field here with a number 1483 in it. And on the apportionment that goes with that, 1483 has the name Hendra. Now, I'm told by our Welsh-speaking historian that is a very important name because it's often applied to the old settlement or the old place, and that anything with that name is likely to have been sort of fossilised in the geography of the place by the Middle Ages. So there might be something very old just in that field over there that's here before that house.
So thanks to his beloved maps, Stuart believes that this area to the south of the house may contain an earlier settlement. So geophys once again find themselves surveying another nice big open flat piece of grass. Once again, it's the perfect site for a geophys survey.
Any vibes?
So once again, what could possibly go wrong?
Is this a Stuart idea or is this actually bona fide?
I wouldn't say anything against Stuart. Not when he's in the back of shot. Moment of truth.
Oh dear. Once again, John can see no evidence of any structures.
That was well worth waiting for, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Well, back to the drawing board. This was a Stuart plan, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was.
So if there is an earlier house here, then where on earth is it? This morning, I thought this big field presented us with one of the easiest, most straightforward time teams we'd done in a long time. 9 hours later, I'm not so sure. Ben, can I remind you what this Royal Commission report written about 35 years ago actually says? This could be a medieval moated site. On balance, however, a Roman origin is far more likely. But excavation will be required to decide the matter. Well, we've done the excavation. It don't seem to be medieval, it don't seem to be moated, and it doesn't seem to be Roman either.
Correct.
But does this mean that there isn't an earlier building on this site?
No, I don't think it means that at all. I think logically, it's likely that an early building would be somewhere around here.
So what's the strategy for tomorrow?
Well, as you can see, there's beautiful lawns. We can't come busting in here with a big machine, but we can get some test pits in here. And hopefully we'll come across some deposits, some layers, something that just gives us a clue where this early house might be.
Well, we may have lost our moat, but do we have an earlier building on this site? Well, the only way to find out is to put our shovels into this beautiful garden. I can't wait. It's the beginning of day 2 here at Llancairfawr Manor in South Wales. And we may not have found a medieval house here in the so-called moat field, but we definitely have archaeology.
Oh, joy. 2 bits of charcoal.
Oh, yeah, lovely.
Because both trenches are picking up traces of a massive enclosure ditch discovered by geophys.
I do wonder whether it could be seriously old.
Yeah.
Yes, prehistoric, if you like. I wouldn't mind betting.
And that will now be our major investigation here, because we've established there isn't a medieval moat here, in spite of what it says on the maps.
What the Royal Commission saw were two banks and a slightly hollowed area in the middle. And I think what has created one of the banks is this big stony feature running through here.
And what do you reckon that is?
Well, at the moment, it is a bank, and that's all we can say about it.
Do you think we'll be able to date these two features?
We got no sort of firm dating evidence, but what these features do seem to respect is the medieval ridge and furrows, so I suspect that some of this is probably medieval.
What I don't understand is that just behind you, there's a bunch of stones going in a completely different direction.
That is what is so important, Tony, because it is not going in the same direction at all. It's a totally different direction, and we think this could be a much, much earlier prehistoric enclosure on the site.
So, Ben, everyone around here believes that there was at one time a moat in this field.
Yeah.
We've had people leaning over that gate for the last 24 hours saying, "Oh, digging there, digging the moat, are you?"
Yes.
Why?
The thing is, the Royal Commission came and they saw some earthworks, and I guess they did well to spot these features because they described them as slight, but given that they're close to this big fortified house, it was a natural thing to think this could be a possibility, a moat. And once you put it on a map, it must be true.
Do you now think that this field isn't going to be able to tell us the story of why this house was here in the first place?
We've clearly got interesting things going on in this field. We've got these rubble banks, we've got this early feature that Phil's been dealing with. There's definitely a story to be told here, but I'm not sure it's going to get us to where the early house is.
There is actually a chance that this big feature was a cattle enclosure, or a horse paddock, or something else. But because these banks and potential post holes are so crisscrossed by later ploughing, it'll have to remain an enigma. Diane, I've got some bad news for you.
OK, break it to me gently then.
It also means I need to have a chat with Diane. There is nothing that ties in with this house at all in this field.
Right, OK, so where do we go from here then?
I don't know, how do you feel about that?
It's difficult because it creates more questions than it answers, really. You know, I can't imagine that this field, this area, they just suddenly put a house here in the 1530s. You know, there's got to be something that went before it. You know, it's such a perfect location. It's near sort of the Roman road, it's near the river, it's near the ford. You can't imagine that people haven't used it for living on sort of since time began almost.
If we want to find evidence of an earlier house, or the first version of that house, then we've got to move in that direction.
That's fine.
Moving in that direction means moving into your lovely garden. Moving into your lovely garden means ripping it up, at least bits of it.
That's fine. We'll just dig holes in the lawn and see what happens.
So a lot of our effort is now shifting to the area immediately around the standing Tudor manor house, as we try to find any previous buildings that may have stood on this site. The test pits are so close to the house because geophys have already eliminated an area further to the south that Stuart thought may contain a hendra, an early Welsh settlement. But undeterred, Stuart has another target, as he believes there should be some sort of structure on the original road into the site.
We need to get across to as close as that wall as possible, so looking at some sort of L shape.
Well, what we're looking for over here, find our level, and then we can chase it back. It'll be a funny shaped trench.
Yeah. It's a funny shaped area. We've got to have a funny shaped trench, isn't it?
Pick a mix.
We're putting in a couple of trenches here because we'd expect an earlier manor to have a defensive wall and a gatehouse, because during medieval times, this was the wild Welsh West. Constant feuds and lawlessness meant even the most powerful families needed to defend themselves.
It's funny that on that door there are no defences at all, even though that's the first door you come to.
But the second door, pull that across.
Certainly the current manor house is a monument to the art of survival.
Right.
That. And same thing.
Another drawbar. But we're on the first floor.
Now that doorway there goes through to the Lord's private quarters, and that's defended in the same way.
So the Pritchards could barricade themselves in there if all else failed?
Well, if all else really fails, they can go down this little escape stair here, down to another part of the house. You'll see that this is a house of power and paranoia.
There's no such paranoia over in the moat field, more a profound sense of relief and jubilation, because we've just made a remarkably rare discovery.
Isn't that wonderful? That looks very prehistoric, and it looks like it's tending more towards the Bronze Age than Iron Age.
That's
but let's have
I was going to say, let's have the local knowledge.
It's got to be Bronze Age, isn't it? Bronze Age, yeah.
That is stunning.
That's really something. I've never dug a piece of Bronze Age pot up in my life, and I've been digging over 50 years.
You've never, ever dug a piece of...
pieces in museums, but no, never seen any.
This pot suggests that people may have been living here during the Bronze Age. And when you consider the whole population of the UK 4,000 years ago was only about 200,000, it's like finding a needle in a haystack.
But I mean, this would be an ideal place for a little Bronze Age settlement down by the stream. Lovely place.
Yeah.
I think we're, it's just superb. Let's find some more.
Yeah.
This is the field that refuses to die. Yesterday evening, we discovered that we hadn't actually got a medieval moat here. Then this morning, we thought we might have something prehistoric, and this afternoon, we've discovered that, yes, we have got prehistoric, and it's actually Bronze Age, which is apparently quite rare, isn't it? But all that brings into question our understanding of John's geophys. A bit Monty Python, isn't it? 2 chairs in the middle of a field.
Yeah, we need the desk.
Presumably, looking for a medieval moat is rather different from trying to find something prehistoric in the geophys.
Yeah, I mean, the problem we've got is all this medieval ridge and furrow ploughing. It's masking what's below, and the ploughing has not only eaten into the archaeology, it's certainly eaten into the magnetic responses. So trying to understand the geophysical anomalies is even more difficult.
OK, so if you forget about there being anything medieval here and you forget all this ploughing, is there any evidence in your geophys of something that might be prehistoric?
Well, the stream like that may be of interest now. Then some of the ditches. Clearly these come into play. We've now extended the survey down and look at some of these curving responses. I mean, it could be we've got a sort of prehistoric landscape here.
So day 1 here, day 2 over there, and now it looks like we're going to come back here again.
That's the way it goes.
That sounds very stony down there, Raksha.
Back over at the house, our quest for an earlier medieval manor is falling apart.
I've just found a piece of plastic in the middle of it.
No.
If there had once been a building in this area, we'd have expected to find some evidence of it. But there's not even a sniff of anything medieval.
I think we've actually got to call it a day on this one. I don't think we're going to get to where we want to get to with this.
And as for Stuart's latest target...
Well, over here we've got natural.
Yep.
Over here we've got natural. And over here we've got natural. We do have a sewage pipe down there, and we've got a beautiful 19th century cobbled surface.
Have you been able to get underneath that?
Well, we have, and we've got natural.
No gatehouse at all?
No gatehouse, no road, no boundary ditch, none of what Stuart thought was going to be here.
But it was worth a try.
Not really.
Oh dear. So not only no moat, but nothing medieval outside the Tudor house either. And certainly no major defences. If there isn't anything here after all, we're really up the creek, aren't we?
No, I don't think we are. We've come here to test a possibility. Why is this house here? Is there anything earlier here? And there's a range of possibilities. It could be that there was an earlier ancestral home here and they simply built this grand new house in the same place. It could be they arrived on a greenfield site. We're here, we're imposing ourselves on this area, we'll build a big house here. The other thing is that although they're thinking a bit about defence, it's also the beginning of the period where they're thinking about the picturesque qualities of the landscape. So again, is it simply that it's just a wonderful area to be in and they're just hedging their bets with a bit of defence because over there is the Badlands still?
They're brave words, but I don't know how much faith I have in them. After all, what do we have? Well, as far as I'm concerned, not a lot, apart from Geophys being on the verge of a nervous breakdown. But just as I'm beginning to think this is one of the most frustrating sights we've encountered in a long time, we make our first proper medieval find.
Gentlemen, I think that might interest you something. Oh, that's a bit nice, isn't it?
This little coin is a major discovery because we suspect it dates to before the time of the current manor house.
That's a little penny, isn't it? Long cross? Long cross penny.
Got the cross on one side, hasn't it?
Well, I'm not entirely sure, because if you have a close look at it, there appears to be a cross on both sides.
Let me put my glasses on.
Look.
And would you believe it, it's not from the garden, it's from the moat field that we dismissed as having nothing medieval in it.
What we can say is this is earlier than the manor house, isn't it? Now, it might just be someone dropped out of a pocket or a purse walking across the field. It could be something like that. But that proves that there were people in this field earlier than the manor house.
It's now the end of a perplexing day too. Well, it's perplexed most of us, although there is one man who seems to be content with the results of his labours.
I really am over the moon. I mean, not only have we got our piece of Bronze Age pot, but more importantly, we've now not got one Bronze Age ditch, but 3 ditches. And the beauty of that is that it implies that people have been living here for such a more extended length of time. So we've got prehistoric occupation here for probably hundreds, if not thousands of years.
And not only that, you've got some rather good finds.
Very, very surprising finds. We have not one, but 2 medieval coins.
What sort of date?
14th century.
If they're 14th century, am I right in saying it is medieval, but it's earlier than our house?
Absolutely, yeah. We've finally extended activity back earlier than the present house.
So there's all to play for. Not only have we got something prehistoric and fairly epic, but it looks as though something quite exciting was going on here in the Middle Ages before that house was built. What'll it be? We'll find out tomorrow. It's the beginning of day 3 of our dig in South Wales. Ow! And it's not just the weather that's taken a turn for the worse.
Have you started then?
Well, we'd like to start if you tell us where you'd like us to dig.
Well, you're there.
The mood's also darker amongst the diggers.
Yes, but it's a map, you know, we can't dig it all.
In spite of our best efforts, we can't find any evidence of an earlier manor here at Llancaich. But we're not giving up yet, even if it means we have to turn the whole garden upside down. So why are we putting this trench in?
Well, this is the back side of the house, really. Yeah. And, well, we see that up there, the privy garderobe.
That tiny little window there?
Yeah. Well, this is the area where all the sort of rubbish and muck would be deposited in.
And presumably, we could possibly find evidence here of an earlier phase of this building, if an earlier phase exists.
Absolutely, yes. The thing is, hopefully we'll have some rubbish pits or a midden heap, something with some early pottery in, because it's been remarkable how clean this site is. We've got very little pottery. It must be going somewhere, and pushing it towards the back seems a good candidate.
A lot's riding on this trench to the north of the manor. We've found no trace of an earlier house in the test pits and trenches to the south, and yet common archaeological sense suggests there could be an earlier manor here.
We've got to go back the whole way now. So hopefully something else comes up a bit further along, otherwise we're going to be rather disappointing again, and all I can say to people is natural.
The Pritchards, who owned Llancaich Manor, had lived in the area since the 1200s, and yet this house was built much later, although no one's ever come up with an exact date. I hope he's in after all this. Until now. Nigel, you've got a dendro date for us?
I have, and that date is AD 1548 to 1565.
1548 to 1565, and you're pretty certain about that?
Yeah, absolutely, it's black and white.
OK, thanks ever so much, mate. Bye. You murmured the word later. Yeah? What do you mean by that?
I mean, sort of all the things in the sort of commission volume suggesting around the 1530s, so 1548 to sort of a little bit later than we thought, but we, you know, got a date.
What does that date tell you about the house?
It tells us that the house is more old-fashioned than we thought, really, because, you know, you're looking at the mid-16th century. You don't expect something like this at that date, normally.
So we're a bit in the backwoods then, really, at that point, aren't we?
A little bit, yes.
Just a bit.
And you've been looking after this house and doing all this reconstruction for ages, but you've never actually known how old the house was.
All we knew was around the 1530s. Well, you know, that's just fantastic to know. That's the thing, because we've never known.
With this date of roughly 1550, we've at least answered one of Diane's questions about Llancaich. It also makes the coins we're finding in the next door field all the more intriguing, because they predate the standing house.
It's either a threepence or a sixpence, most likely of Elizabeth I.
Could it be something a bit special?
It's already special, I think.
As well as this fantastic find, we've also discovered coins that are over 100 years earlier than the current house.
I can see a crown. I can see a crown because we've got one of the there. I'm so excited. I actually knocked the light over. You can see one of the fleur-de-lis is complete in the middle, and you can see a half fleur-de-lis at the end. So that's the angular end of a crown. These marked kind of around 1280, don't they?
But instead of jumping for joy that we've found evidence of an earlier house, the archaeologists have taken a more pragmatic view as to why the coins are here.
This coin could just have been dropped as an accidental loss. It isn't necessarily evidence for earlier activity on this site.
3 or 4 coins, different dates, but all from this area. You've detected all the other spoil and the other trenches, but they're concentrated here. That's interesting.
Do you think that might be evidence of settlement or evidence of trading or what?
It's evidence of where people have been congregating with money in their pockets, and that's routeways, meeting places, that kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it would seem that Llancaich was at a major intersection of routeways.
We've got the house here, and it's quite clear looking at it that it's in a landscape dominated by deep valleys.
The great advantage of the stream, the Caich coming down there, is that it defines for you. You've got a shallow pass running through here that actually allows you to run from east to west across the valleys. Is something that's really quite unique and important for this area.
This is one of the few places that routes from deep in the valleys would meet with east-west traffic. So the coins aren't evidence of a grand early house, but more likely of a dodgy crossroads where for centuries travellers tripped up and lost their loose change.
Is that another patch of charcoal in the bottom there, Phil?
Yeah, it is, Tracy.
And yet this field has produced our best discovery so far, a network of Bronze Age ditches some 3,500 years older than the house. But even with this information, we still can't make head or tail of the geophys.
I mean, we've done more survey and we're getting the same sort of results. I mean, we've still got odd lengths of ditches, we've got odd pits, and they're scattered right across the field. But there's no clear patterns in the results.
There's no sort of discrete, nice, juicy target to go for. If I could extend that trench all the way down the field...
Hang on, so how wide is that trench?
Very wide.
And you'd like to extend it down the length of this field?
Yeah, why not?
You're being slightly impractical.
Maybe just slightly. I don't think we can just go poking around hoping that we're going to hit something in here.
Keep looking, you might find something small and sexy. In the meantime, I'm going on to another scene.
Right, so Phil, we've got all sorts of features in here. So when I've got school children coming in to sort of go around the site and I want to be able to tell them what we found in the field, what am I going to be able to tell them about what was going on here in the prehistoric period?
Well, what you can say with absolute certainty is that people have been here for at least 4,000 years. And we do have a lot of ditches. Let's be clear about this. Over where Matt is, we can see he's standing in one, next door is another one, and next door to that is another one. Those ditches have been recut. They've been redug. They've been redug by hand. That's a lot of effort. What that does mean is that their boundaries have stayed static for a very long time. What is absolutely indisputable is that we've got one piece of early Bronze Age pot. That's going to take us back to about 2000 BC.
So thanks to Phil and his diggers' dogged determination, Diane has got a story to tell about this field. Just not the one she was expecting. But there is a chance that the kids who visit here will be more interested in the story about the day Time Team took a mechanical digger to Llankayac's beautifully manicured lawn. Because Ben, under the concerned watch of the manor's gardeners, is opening another trench to the north of the house. This trench is our absolutely last-ditch attempt to find any evidence of a house, or actually anything medieval that predates our house.
Well, it's a cable. I don't think it's still connected to anything. Let's hope not.
Because our previous last-ditch attempt to find something of archaeological note hasn't been completely successful. Just when we thought that we weren't going to get any archaeology at all, away from the field over there, away from the house over here on the far side of the current boundary of that house where Faye and Rakshar have been working on their own for ages, they've found evidence not only of life but of death too, haven't you, Faye?
We've certainly got evidence of death, yes. We've got what looks like a dead horse.
A dead horse?
Yep.
Can you date it?
Well, we've got one bit of pottery from actually that trench there, which is 17th century.
So we can now say that sometime a horse died on this farm. Thank you for your contribution to this story. I'll avoid any remarks about flogging a dead horse. Although I can't help but wonder that in spite of Ben's heroic attempts to re-landscape the whole of the garden...
It's natural. This looks like natural.
Oh. We are now flogging a dead what-you-call-it.
I just cannot understand the lack of pottery, rubbish, detritus. These must have been the cleanest people in Wales.
The evidence speaks for itself. So here we go, the timeline. This is the Bronze Age, little piece of pot there. Nothing in the Iron Age. Nothing in the Roman, nothing in the early Christian, or the Viking, or the Norman. Here we are in the 15th century. We've got 2 coins. 16th century, a thimble. 17th century, a ropey piece of tile. 19th century, a penny and a bit of pot. Helen, what's happened?
Well, from the archaeological evidence, it seems like we have a bit of activity here in the Bronze Age, and then a great lot of nothing, until sometime in the 16th century, people start dropping things. Maybe they built a house, and then they apparently went away again.
I have to say, in defence of all the people who were living in all these vast eons of time, they might have been making stuff that hasn't survived in the ground.
They might have been, but that's absence of evidence, and it's really dangerous to use that to argue that that is evidence of absence.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's getting there. We've nearly got enough to say nothing was happening. Is that too depressing?
No. Thank you, Helen. So we nearly have enough to say nothing was happening between the digging of these Bronze Age ditches and the building of the current manor. And that's a resolution of sorts, I suppose.
It really doesn't help having that later feature.
Well, the ridge of furrow.
Yeah.
It must have just chopped the top off it.
Yeah.
But surprisingly, there is a faction of the team that thinks the two could still be linked, and it's all down to the medieval Welsh love of heritage and making a link with your ancestors.
We now know that the ditches over there might be as old as Bronze Age. They're certainly old.
Yes.
Do you think that the Pritchards would have been aware of that when they came to build their house here?
Certainly Phil and Ben seem quite confident that whatever there was out there could have been visible in the 16th century when they got here. And this could, I think, have been a real attraction for a gentry family.
So if it's an ancient place, to build a house next door would give them a kind of air of legitimacy that we've always been here.
This is a period when the antiquarian movement is becoming much more popular, much more widespread as part of the cult and the education of the gentry. there was certainly a cachet, there was a value to having what now in modern archaeological terms you call an ancient monument. Having that very direct and immediate connection with the past would have been something that would have meant a great deal to them, and I think it's very exciting, the possibilities here.
We're now confident that echoes of that prehistoric landscape would have been visible in the 16th century. But our hunt for an earlier medieval manor has been a completely different kettle of fish.
Well,
digging produced nothing to the east of the building, while geophys and test pits showed nothing to the south. The results weren't too hot either to the west. And as for the north, well, we did find an electrical cable and a dead horse. If I was feeling generous, I'd call it a mixed result. OK, after 3 days' excavation, are we in a position to say whether or not there was a medieval manor anywhere on this site before this one?
yes, we are in a position to say that.
And what's the answer?
No, there wasn't. I'm certain. Not one scrap of medieval pottery from all these holes we've dug. And if there was a medieval house here, we'd find pottery everywhere. I'm sure of it. It's just not there.
You've not even seen any background manuring on the fields you get when privies are cleared out and they chuck the stuff on the land. We've not got any of that.
Which rather begs the question, why did they build this place on a greenfield site?
If you think about what originally brought us to this site, it was that people saw an earthwork over there, and if it was visible in the 1970s, it should have been visible in the 1570s as well. I think that is what drew them here, and we know that there was an interest in the past on the part of the Pritchards, and we know that there's an interesting field name of Hendra. I think those all point to this being a special place.
That's quite interesting. You're saying they might have built this place here because in folklore it was an important site.
I think there's every chance of that, yeah.
So we now know the Pritchards didn't come here until the 1550s, when they built a beautiful, if somewhat old-fashioned house on a major crossroads beside some ancient mysterious earthworks. And it's tantalising to think that they were trying to forge a link with the great Welsh hero Ifor Bach, the 12th century icon from whom the Pritchards claimed to be directly descended. And I was just talking to a couple of local people who work here, and they were over the moon that we'd managed to take the story of this site right back to the prehistoric.
Well, it's absolutely wonderful. You know, I mean, you always hope that you're going to find things that are really fascinating, but to find out we've got something that's a Bronze Age enclosure, it's wonderful.
And we've dated your house.
Yeah. Which was, you know, every little bit extra just makes more of the story, and you can tell a better story.
But what strikes me as really ironic is that the people who put that house up thought they were harking back to their ancient ancestors of 400 years previously, but in fact, they were harking back to their ancestors 3,000 years previously.
Yes. Amazing, isn't it, really?